Turn your Bibles to Galatians chapter 5. We're down toward the end of the chapter, starting with verse 19. I told you last week we were going to slow down a little bit and walk through these works of the flesh and kind of spending some time defining those terms so that we have a better understanding of what they mean. Sometimes it pays to slow down a little bit and not just kind of gloss through some of these things. So we're going to do that in these verses. We'll start reading verses 19 through 21. He says, "Now the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envy, murder, drunkenness, revelries, and the like, of which I tell you before, just as I told you in time past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God." So at the end of that, couple of things. Those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. He's clearly saying there, you're not going to heaven if you practice any of these things. Now notice the word practice. It's not somebody making a step and fixing it, but somebody who continues on, unrepentant in these things is the idea. And then the other thing I want to point out in that last verse there, he says, and the like, or I think some versions say, and such like, which means this list is not complete. Things that fit into this category, things that are like these things. And we might touch on some of that as we go through some of these works of the flesh. But those would be some things to point out here at the outset of this. Now, we'll start off with the very first one. He says, the works of the flesh are evident. By the way, the word evident, what does evident mean? They're known, they're clear, it's obvious. In other words, this is not a mystery here. You know, we talk about the Bible being understandable, and these works of the flesh, he says they're obvious, they're evident, they're clear. Everybody knows what they are, so it's not like somebody should be saying, well, I didn't know fornication was a sin. Well, you should know that, it's evident, okay? But he starts off the list with the word adultery, and the second word is fornication. Now, depending on your translation, some translations omit the word adultery there. We remember when we studied about how we got the Bible, and there are manuscripts that differ, and some of the manuscripts will have adultery first on the list, and some omit the word adultery. And so that's the reason that I'm telling you that. So if you're using one of those other translations and you see why the word adultery is not there, that's why, because of the manuscript from which your Bible was translated. But we'll take it as though it were there, because if it's not here, it's mentioned in other places for sure. So adultery. What is adultery?
Sexual acts with someone that's married, one party or the other or both.
That's right. It's sexual relations, and listen carefully, with the spouse of another. So it's not your spouse; it's somebody else's spouse. And so we sometimes call that having an affair. But sexual relations with the spouse of another. And you think about the word adultery, it has come to mean over the years, we talk about adulterating. What are we saying when we adulterate something?
You pollute it.
Yeah, there you go.
Another.
Yeah, there you go.
Something that ain't
when you adulterate, say if you got a glass of water, boy, and you're getting ready to drink that, and then someone comes along and dumps a bunch of chemicals in it. They've adulterated it. They've polluted it. Well, think about how that applies to a marriage. When you go outside of your marriage and have a relation with somebody else, you've polluted your marriage. You've corrupted it. And that's, of course, obviously not a good thing to do that. And this becomes actually the only grounds upon which a divorce can be obtained. In Matthew 19:9, Jesus makes that exception. He has a rule and an exception. Matthew 19:9, he says, I say to you that whoever divorces his wife, except for fornication or sexual immorality, depending on your translation, and marries another, commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. So there's the word adultery. Now take the exception out just a second. Just forget that exception is there and let's read what it says. Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. That's the rule. The rule is divorce is not allowed, and if you divorce and you marry somebody else, not only have you broken the law of not divorcing, but you've added sin upon sin by marrying somebody else. Okay? So the first rule you broke was you're not supposed to divorce. That's Matthew 19:6. Let not man put asunder. The second rule then, if you marry somebody else, you've broken another rule and you're committing adultery. Now, in our civil laws, they don't recognize that. You can divorce and remarry as many times as you want to. But according to the Bible, whose law reigns supreme? God. We must obey God rather than man. So regardless of what the civil law says, God's law is very clear about this. Then bring in the exception. Whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality. So there's the only exception mentioned. There's no other exception. And that brings us to the next word on our list in Galatians 5:19, except for fornication or sexual immorality. What is fornication?
Sexual act outside being married at all.
Yeah. It's any kind of unlawful sexual relations. Fornication is the bigger, broader term. It encompasses a whole lot more. Adultery is very specific. It involves a married person, but they're married to somebody else. So you have relations with this married person, they're married to somebody else. That's a very specific thing. But fornication includes that, but it also includes a whole host of other sexual relations. Fornication encompasses all of this. Premarital sex. So when you get two people who've never been married before and they go out and have sexual relations, that's fornication. It includes adultery. Adultery is fornication. Matthew 19:9 says that, except for fornication. If your spouse commits fornication, guess what they also committed? Adultery. Yeah, they committed adultery. So it includes adultery. It includes bestiality. Now that may sound odd to us, but apparently it's a problem because God mentions it specifically in the Old Testament. Thou shalt not lie down with a beast to mate with it. And so think about that. There are people who do that. Now that is as bizarre and strange as that is. There are people who do that. That would be fornication. That's illicit sexual relations. It would include homosexuality. In fact, just to clinch this point, turn over to Jude 7. I think it's Jude 7. I know it's in the book of Jude. I think it's verse 7. But he talks about Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah. He says, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to fornication or sexual immorality, that depends on your translation, and gone after strange flesh. So he calls it fornication there, but what were they doing in Sodom and Gomorrah?
They were being homosexual.
That was homosexuality, yeah. But he calls it fornication right here. That's what I wanted you to see. So if somebody has if your spouse has a homosexual relation, and that has happened, there have been, especially in modern times, there have been marriages who broke up because one of the spouse decided to become a homosexual, and so they go out and have an affair with a gay in a gay relationship. That's fornication. That's fornication. So it's any kind of illicit sexual immorality, lesbianism, incest, sexual relations with someone inside the family. That's fornication. And if you need proof on that, 1 Corinthians 5, there's fornication among you, and such fornication as is not even named among the Gentiles, that a man has his father's wife. So in the family, see. So that's incest. Rape. I was preaching on this one time, and I troubled a young girl. She hadn't been married very long, but I said, rape is fornication. And she was just shook all up, and she came to me. She says, you mean if I get raped, my husband can divorce me? And I said, no. I said, I mean if your husband rapes somebody, you can divorce him. And she said, oh. She didn't understand what I was saying. But rape is a sexual sin. And so that would be fornication. And in modern times, it was allowed under the old law, but even having a concubine, that would be a fornication type relationship. And I went through all that just to show you that fornication is a broad term. It covers all of that. All of that is covered under the term fornication. Any kind of illicit sexual relations, okay, that's not allowed. Third one on the list, Galatians 5:19, uncleanness. We touched on that a little bit last week when we were talking about pornography. Uncleanness here, he's not talking about physical uncleanness in the sense of having dirty hands or needing to take a bath. He's talking about moral uncleanness. And so it's moral filth of any kind. And that's a broad term. It could include having dirty thoughts. That's uncleanness. Using dirty words. Dressing in a dirty fashion, immoral. I mean immoral when I say dirty. I mean an immoral way. And so unclean is any kind of moral filth. So you can see that's sort of a broad category here. And right on the heels of that, licentiousness or lewdness. That's the last sin in verse 19. And depending on your translation, it will say licentiousness, it will say lewdness, or it will say lasciviousness. One of those three usually is the way it's translated. Huh?
Sensuality, I think.
Yeah, okay, sensuality would be, that would be another translation. And the word means, it literally means the absence of restraint, and especially in sexual areas. It's not limited to that, but particularly or especially in sexual areas. There's no restraint. You can do anything. There's nothing to stop you. You'll commit adultery. You'll commit fornication. You'll do whatever. That's the idea of lasciviousness or lewdness. And a lot of times when I preach on this, I'll go to Proverbs 7. So flip over there with me just for a second. There's a great illustration of lasciviousness in Proverbs chapter 7. When you think about the application of the term, absence of restraint, especially sexually, we start off here in Proverbs 7 in verse 10. He says, "And there a woman met him with the attire of a harlot and crafty of heart." Attire of a harlot. So you can dress in a lascivious way. Now, I don't know how harlots dressed in the day when Solomon wrote this, but I know how they dress today. How do harlots dress today? Very little, yeah. They wear short shorts. They wear halter tops. They wear fishnet stockings. They wear very, very, very mini skirts, okay? So you start thinking, and why do they wear things like that? Yeah, it's as Brother Randall used to say, ladies, if you haven't got any groceries for sale, take down your sign. That's a sign. I'm advertising here. I'm available. And you can dress in a lascivious way. Now think about that. When you send your daughters out, how are they dressed? Are they wearing mini skirts? That's the attire of a harlot. Are they wearing short shorts? That's the attire of a harlot. Think about that, okay? So you can dress in a lascivious way, and you are advertising that you're available. That's the message that you're sending to the opposite sex when you walk down the street dressed that way. So please understand that. Husbands sometimes will let their wives go out in public dressed that way. Why? I don't know. I don't understand it. But they'll go let their wives go out dressed like a harlot. They'll let their daughters go out dressed like a harlot. You need to be the Christian that says, not in my home. My daughter's not going out dressed that way, and my wife's not going out dressed that way. That's not happening, not in this house. And if you think it's going to happen, you and me is going to have problems, spouse, or you and me is going to have problems, daughter. That's not happening in this household. So that's the idea. So you can dress lasciviously. Then we go on, verse 11 to 14, or 11 to 13. She was loud and rebellious. Her feet would not stay at home. At times she's outside, at times in the open square, lurking at every corner. So she caught him and she kissed him. Now think about that. You can behave in a lascivious way. So not only do you dress lasciviously, but you can behave lasciviously. What's this woman doing here? She's dressed as a harlot, and then what's she doing? Yeah, she's lurking, it says. My version says she's lurking. And she grabs him and she kissed him. So she's making a pass at him. So not only does she dress in a lascivious way, but she's behaving in a lascivious way. Yes?
Well, the men shouldn't be looking. I'll dress the way I want to.
Yeah.
Everyone shouldn't be looking.
Yeah. And the men shouldn't be looking. But when you put it up there, that puts you just as guilty as him. Yeah, maybe he shouldn't be looking. Okay, point taken. But you shouldn't dress to attract that look. And so both of them end up being guilty. Yeah,
A saying I thought was pretty good. He said, if I see a woman out dressed immodestly, he said, when I see her, that's shame on her.
Yeah.
He said, when I look at her again, that's shame on me. And I thought that's a good way to look at it.
Yes, yes. And then finally, starting in the middle of verse 13, with an impudent pace she said to him, I have peace offerings with me. Today I paid my vow, so I came out to meet you, diligently to seek your face. I have found you. I spread my bed with tapestry, colored coverings of Egyptian linen. I perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come and let us take our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with love, for my husband is not at home. He's gone on a long journey. Now we got lascivious talk. So think about that. Lascivious dress, lascivious conduct, lascivious talk. She is clearly coming on to him. Hubby's not home. My bed's ready and ready to go. Come on, let's go. And so she's clearly out to try and attract this man and bring him in an illicit relationship. So there's lascivious dress, lascivious talk, and lascivious conduct. Yes, sir. Yeah, in her thoughts, that's right. Yeah, in her thoughts, that's right. Now, one more thing I want to add before we move on here, and that is the fact that it seems like we've been picking on the women. Men can be guilty of lasciviousness too. We sometimes don't like to think about that, but when you're out in public and a man rips his shirt off around women, women are going to see that. And women have feelings too. So you need to think about that. You need to think about how you're dressed. Are your shorts too short, gentlemen? Are you running around without a shirt on in front of the other ladies that you're not married to, gentlemen? It goes both ways. Women have sexual desires too. And so I didn't want you to think we were just picking on the ladies here. Men can be guilty of this as well. Okay, and so we need to be fair on that. Anything else on those first four sins we listed there?
This term here kind of makes me think of whenever, was it one of the Herods, whichever one it was that his stepdaughter danced in front of him and then asked for the
head of
John the Baptist. I mean, so her dance, was provocative enough and sensual to excite, and I think of that, this, and so much of the modern stuff that people want involved in the dance and of the dressing and the way would fall into this category, I think.
Yep,
so
it would. Yeah, under the heading of lasciviousness, yes.
A lot of people like the TV shows, wrestling and stuff. You watch wrestling.
Yeah. They're not wearing much.
They're not wearing much.
Yeah.
I don't think a Christian ought to be watching stuff like that.
Yeah, it's probably not a good idea because you're right, they're not wearing much. Yeah, they're not wearing much, and that I think that should be factored in. Where you go, if you frequent the beach, what are you going to find there? I'm not saying that you shouldn't ever go to the beach. I've gone myself. But what are you going to see there? Very likely. You're going to see women run around in bikinis, and you'll see men run around with just nothing but shorts on. And why invite that temptation when you know that's what you're going to see there? So there are places to go where you don't see that. And just as an example, and it's changing rapidly, but down there where Anna's mama lives, there's a place called Navarre Beach, and there's very little people there. Now, again, that's changing as time goes by. More and more hotels are being built along, but there are places to go where you can actually go and be at the beach and not have to see all that stuff. And so I think you make a good point. Okay, anything else?
I'm sorry.
No, you go, and then we'll go to Steve.
Sexual immorality, moral impurity, and promiscuity. Does that cover what we just covered?
Yeah, I think is the promiscuity the last word there? Yeah, that's the word they're translating lasciviousness. Yeah. And so read them again. What were they?
Sexual immorality.
Okay, that's fornication.
Moral impurity.
That's uncleanness.
Promiscuity.
And that's licentiousness. Yeah. Yeah, it's the same. They just chose to use different words to translate it. But yeah, the promiscuity, the idea of being loose, loose behavior. So loose dress, loose talk, loose actions. Yeah, I didn't realize that promiscuity, and it fits, but I've always seen lasciviousness and lewdness and licentiousness, but now there's another one there, promiscuity, but it's the same idea. But those sins in verse 19, all of those are sexual sins. So I wanted you to see the relationship of those. They're all sexual sins. But
Think about the passage you using in Proverbs where it talks about her speaking to him, her talking to him.
Yeah.
And so much of the time, that's what happens with people when they wind up committing adultery with
Yeah.
somebody. They get to talking to somebody other than their spouse
Yeah.
in sexual matters,
Yeah.
in sexual way that
Well,
they
and
don't even need to start that way or go
Yeah.
anywhere close to
It's
that.
dangerous, and what you're talking about with the talking, sometimes you'll have, a married woman will come and talk to a man who's not her husband. Well, I've got problems with my husband. That's a danger sign right there. Why would you go and talk to some other man who's not your husband? You got a problem with your husband, talk to him. You go talking to that other man, guess what? Oh, honey, I feel sorry for you. And then you start talking, and you talk a little bit more, and I don't know why he treated anybody like that. You look so fine, you look so pretty, and the next thing you know, off they go into the bed of iniquity. And you got to be careful about bearing your soul about your marriage problems. If you got a marriage problem, find another lady. If you're a lady, find another lady to talk to. If you're a man, find another man to talk to. Don't talk to someone of the opposite sex, because that's dangerous. That should be a flashing neon sign. Let's not do this. This is not a good idea, because it might lead to something. Yes.
I was going to bring up some of the singers, so-called singers.
Yeah.
I don't think they're country singers, but
Yeah.
people like Lady Gaga, you see it on the commercial once in
Yeah.
a while. A lot of them don't wear any clothes anymore
Yeah.
to speak of.
Yeah.
I about decided they can't sing, so they draw a crowd that way.
Yeah. Yeah, they do about anything to draw a crowd, and it is pitiful the way some of them dress. It really is. And a lot of those entertainers, I won't say all, but a lot of them, if you just stop and look at them and read about them, sadly, most of them are drug users, fornicators, adulterers. They're all these things, and yet we look up to them and we buy their music and we support their lifestyle. And I'm not saying you should never buy a song, but I'm saying think about that, because most of those people, a lot of those people, might be a better way to say it, but a lot of those people, if not most, are immoral people. And you even come into the real country music category. I like some of those people you're saying aren't country, but George Jones was a drunkard. I mean, that's exactly what he was. And so you get into that entertainment industry, and you're dealing with a den of sin. Okay? Now, I like country music, don't get me wrong, but just I want you to understand the kind of people you're dealing with here. You're not dealing with and then they get on the stage, they're drunkards and fornicators and drug users, and they get on stage singing about, oh, how I love Jesus. And they sing those gospel songs like, really? Really? Doesn't everybody know what you do? And there you are pretending to love Jesus. Yes.
Like our Baptist friends around here, they'll say the same thing. Go out and get drunk every Friday and Saturday night,
Yeah.
do whatever,
Yeah.
adultery, fornicate, whatever. But they're the same way whether they are famous or not.
Yeah, you're right. That's right. They don't have to be famous to be that way. There are people who are just normal, everyday people that are that way too. I think you make a good point. Yeah.
Politics, but it didn't do it.
Yeah. All right. Verse 20. He gets into a couple of religious sins here. Idolatry and sorcery. We'll take them one at a time, but those are religious sins. Idolatry, what is that?
Anything other than God.
Yeah. You worship anything other than God. Now, the emphasis here on anything, because sometimes we usually think of worshiping a statue, worshiping a false god like Baal or Molech, and that's certainly idolatry. But it can be anything. Sometimes we worship our time. We worship our money. Okay, we worship our things. We worship our possessions, and we won't give it up, not even for the Lord. And I've known of people who get so caught up in their career and so caught up in their work that they're missing half the Sundays, not even coming to services, because I got to take another business trip. And they're gone, and when they're on that business trip and they're not attending services anywhere else, I'm not saying you can't travel when you do business, but I'm saying you got to think about the Lord. If you're traveling somewhere, make arrangements to worship with people somewhere. You can do that, But there are people that get so wrapped up in their business and so caught up in making a dollar that the Lord becomes secondary, or maybe third or fourth area. He comes way down the list, and that's not good. That's idolatry, because now that dollar or that job has become more important to you than God, and that's not good. Okay. Yeah.
Just because they're on vacation, they don't have to go to church anywhere.
Yeah, you don't get a vacation from God. Yeah, if you plan a vacation, you know where you're going. Look, see whether there's churches there close by. You can do that. It's not that difficult. There are all kinds, especially today, all kinds of websites where you have addresses of churches all over the country, all over the world, really. So wherever you travel, most of the time you can find a church. There might be occasions where you're out in an isolated place where there's no church, but most of the time, most places people go, there's a church close by. So make that part of your vacation plans. Yes.
Find the right church to go to, really.
Yeah, you got to do a little digging. Yeah, because not every church, even if it says Church of Christ, they're not always doing the right thing. That's true. That's true. That is true. You got to do a little digging. That is true.
The websites are good about that.
Yeah.
About finding.
Yeah, you'll have a lot of websites that promote the more liberal churches, and then you'll have other websites like Truth Magazine that would promote the more conservative churches, and so you're more likely to find a good place there when you look on that website.
Little country church, and I said, oh, we're going to stop there. Well, we did. We got there early. During the Sunday school lesson, he was in there drinking coffee. I said, you want to go? He said, well, we're down here as we said, but I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, and believe it or not, there are churches that actually have a coffee bar out in the lobby when you come in, and they'll sell you a cup of coffee, and it's like, really? It kind of reminds me of Jesus driving out the money changers. You just want to grab a whip and start driving people out of the building. Get out of here! What are you doing? But it's unbelievable what you might see out on the road. So that's idolatry. I'm going to try and get this one in. Sorcery. Now, some versions will say witchcraft. That's the second sin in verse 20. What does your CSB say? Sorcery. Okay. So sorcery or witchcraft. Now, that's an interesting word. And I've done some study on that over the years. And the Greek word is pharmakia. Pharmakia. Now, you hear something in that word, pharma. What's the pharmacy? Drugstore, yeah. Now, I'm not arguing that a drugstore is sinful, so don't miss my point here, but that's where the word comes from. So, pharmakia, and it's the use of drugs and potions and spells and dabbling in occult practices, okay? And you think about it, you get somebody high, and then you do a little fancy magic trick, and what are they going to think? Whew. He's got some real power. You see, that's how these guys do their tricks. They give you some little drug and get you kind of loopy, get you a little high, and then they do this little fancy magic trick, and then you're like going, whoa, he's really got some power. And that's what they used to do in ancient times, and they still do it in some places. They still do it today, yes.
I always think that back when he was talking about sorcery, I think they must have had something that they could do that was for real, because when Moses went in front of Pharaoh, I mean, you couldn't poison all of them's mind with that drug or whatever.
Yeah, I think you may be right. I don't know if we could prove that, but I think in ancient times, perhaps some of those people may have had some kind of miraculous power, limited. Yeah, limited, because there came a point when Pharaoh's magician said, we can't duplicate that. That's the finger of God. But they could duplicate some of that stuff. And so it makes you wonder if maybe they did have some miraculous power, or if there was some other trick. I don't know, but I've often wondered about that. I think you may be onto something. But I don't think they have that kind of power today. But I think maybe back then they might have, yes.
Powers too, and he's trying to challenge God, and I'm pretty sure it's still happening today.
Yeah, there's no doubt that he is big in trying to oppose God in any way that he can, I don't think that he has miraculous powers, because that would put him above. God doesn't use them. If God's not using miraculous powers, then I'm pretty sure he's seen to it that Satan can't use them either. But I do think you have a valid point that he's working double time, overtime to try and persuade people away from God, no doubt about it. But I do think you're right that in ancient times there may have been more to it. There may have been some.
Allows him to have.
Yeah, he only can do what God allows him to do, yes.
Some people might be possessed and they have to have a priest, they think the Catholic priest or whatever.
And I don't think I don't think demon possession is around anymore, but there are people who believe that it is. But I think that all that stuff ended with the ending of the miracles, the demon possession and the ability to cast out the demons on the other side of the equation, and all those miraculous powers ended in the first century. But way back when, they may have been able to do little things, maybe.
Simon the sorcerer, he could do things to bewitch the people. He could do things to make people think that he had. But when Philip came and performed miracles, everybody, him and everybody could see the difference.
Yes. Now, but notice that in ancient times, this sin was connected with occult practices. So it wasn't just the drugs, but it was the occult practices, dabbling in magical arts, worship of demons and things of this nature. So you have that connection. But now fast forward to our day, and I want you to tie it in with and such like. Sorcery and such like. And you think today about how people abuse drugs. I think that would fit. So when people abuse drugs, and you can abuse, obviously, illegal drugs, but you can even abuse legal drugs. I've known of people, they'll go from doctor to doctor to doctor searching for drugs, searching for med. And there are some doctors who are happy to give out those prescriptions. And they'll go to this doctor, and when he says, I'm done, they'll go to another doctor. And he says, well, I'm done, I'm not writing you anymore. Well, they'll go to another. And then and I've known people do that. I've known Christians to do this. And they'll go from doctor to doctor getting all these drugs, and then you see them 2 days later, and they're so high they can't hardly talk to you. Okay, on some kind of real strong pain medicine or something like that, or maybe worse. And that's sinful. I'm sorry. That's sinful. And I think it would fall under this heading when he says sorcery and then and such like. Okay? Maybe he's not dabbling in the occult practice. Maybe he's not worshiping the devil, but he's definitely misusing the drugs, for sure, without a doubt. So I wanted you to see that connection. So there's almost a direct connection there, biblically, to the misuse of drugs. Okay.
That they send them to.
Pain what? Clinics. Yeah.
When I had my ankle replaced, he only could give me 3 days.
Yeah. They have, the law has really come in and cracked down on a lot of that stuff, and rightly so, because they used to just give them out like candy.
And I know people that take drugs all the time.
Yeah.
And I asked him about that. He said what they do is they go to the pain clinics and they just give them drugs till they die.
Yeah.
And some of them done died now.
Yep. I see a hand. Yes.
To get back to the word pharmakia, all we have to do is look at the medical symbol. It's the 2 snakes or 1 snake with the rod of the Greek god Asclepius, and that should show us right there what it's all about.
Yeah, but I wouldn't argue, I know what you're saying, but I wouldn't argue that all medication is wrong. I wouldn't argue that all drugs are wrong. They can help it. Even in the Bible times, they would use things like wine medicinally, and so there are. And Luke was a physician. The man who wrote the Gospel of Luke and the Book of Acts was a physician. So I wouldn't argue that all drugs are bad. They have their use and they have their benefits. If you have heart trouble, you're going to need some heart medication. If you have kidney trouble, you're going to need some kidney medication. Now, are there abuses? And I think that's what you're driving at. Yes. There are abuses in the medical community, overprescription of certain drugs and things of that nature. And the drug companies, they have a big profit motivation. And I think that needs to be factored in. But I would not argue that we shouldn't ever take any kind of medicine. I think that's overkill, yes.
Herbs all kinds of natural things that the pharmaceuticals
But,
prohibit.
and you can make that choice if you like. Yeah, you can make that choice if you like, but I wouldn't say that everybody needs to do that. I think if you have heart trouble and you need heart medicine, and it's not a natural herb, I'd say take it. I don't think that'd be a wrong. What was you going to say?
I mean, in the wintertime, everybody starts getting colds and coughs and stuff. When we was young, granddaddy, grandma, whatever, had what's called toddy.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of alcohol, you
Yeah.
had honey, to make it thicker,
Yeah.
to soothe the throat.
Yep.
Peppermint, whatever you put in it. I don't see anything
I don't
wrong with it
either.
whatsoever.
Yeah, I don't either. I think that's just fine. Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, even if you buy cold medicine off the shelf, you buy NyQuil, it's got alcohol in it. And so, yeah, in a limited dosage for medical purposes, I think that would be fine. And to your point, I think that's just fine. And so it's all about trying to not go to the sinful extreme. You take something that's legitimate, medication, and then you run to extremes and you overuse it and misuse it, and that's what we're trying to avoid here. We don't want to do the overkill and the misuse and the addiction and all that. That's what we want to stay away from. And I've talked over time. I better hush. We'll start with verse the next one, whatever that is, next week.